Across the razor-sharp volcanic glass of Ember Ridge, the biological anomaly dragged itself forward. Surface temperature registered at -40 degrees standard. Subterranean thermal vents expelled toxic sulfuric plumes into the thin atmosphere. Luminara recorded the specimen's progress from the threshold of the ancient sanctum, her internal resonance frequencies humming in a low, discordant state of confusion. This was a Thera 6. It was a designated quarantine zone, yet this fragile, carbon-based biped refused to cease functioning. Its environmental shell was severely compromised. A cracked visor obscured the creature's face, the dying display flickering with a persistent, impossible signal that served as a targeting vector it should not have possessed. The atmospheric readings were critical, with oxygen levels dipping to 3%. Thermal regulation had failed completely. To survive a 14-day atmospheric collapse without localized support protocols was statistically impossible. Unprecedented. Witness the exact moment the cosmic scales tip. The weakest vessels often carry the most catastrophic power into the dark. Luminara stepped out from the humming stone archway. Her liquid gold robes did not register the freezing wind, repelling the harsh elements through passive kinetic shielding. The closer the anomaly crawled to the steps, the warmer the rock beneath it became. The sanctum was responding. Ambient energy that had lain dormant for millennia began to cycle upward, drawn to the chaotic biorhythm of the dying creature. It collapsed at the base of the stairs, and a smear of dark red biological fluid stained the pristine, molecularly perfect steps. Luminara approached. Her bioluminescent subdermal pathways pulsed with a cool, investigative blue light, recalibrating their frequency to assess the foreign biology. She possessed glowing blue eyes capable of processing 14 spectrums of light, but she had never visually confirmed a human before. They were a myth whispered in the outer sectors. They were a species known only for their unoptimized biology and irrational expansion. She reached down. She effortlessly lifted the failing organism. It weighed almost nothing, its bone density laughably inadequate for deep space traversal. She carried him inside, passing through the threshold into the golden light of the inner chamber, where the temperature stabilized instantly. She laid him upon a diagnostic plinth carved from single-source silicate. His cellular degradation is mathematically beyond the threshold of... She abandoned the calculation entirely. The frozen hand twitched, instinctively gripping her wrist with surprising mechanical leverage. Luminara stared at the point of contact. Her internal harmonics spiked sharply. She struggled to process the tactile data. His body was a catastrophic failure of engineering, yet it exhibited an anomalous will to persist. She initiated a dermal energy transfer to stabilize his failing organs. Pure, restorative golden energy flowed from her palms into his chest, knitting his ruptured tissues together with an efficiency surpassing anything documented in standard medical archives. As the energy transfer proceeded, her visual receptors locked onto a detail on his synthetic undersuit. Just below his collarbone, the fabric had been torn and repaired. The stitching was crude. It was asymmetrical. It was entirely inefficient. A frayed knot of red thread sat haphazardly against the dark gray mesh. It served no structural purpose. It was mathematically absurd. Luminara continued to pour life-sustaining force into his fragile form, prioritizing his collapsing respiratory system. Yet she found herself cataloging the microscopic fraying of that single red thread, baffled by the illogical, inefficient care someone had taken to manually mend a disposable garment rather than simply requisitioning a replacement. The human gasped. His chest heaved. The atmospheric processors in the room adjusted to his specific biological requirements. rapidly altering the nitrogen-oxygen mix. His eyes opened behind the cracked visor. They were wide. They were unfocused. They tracked the ancient carvings along the vaulted ceiling. He did not scream. He did not attempt to flee. "You are in the sanctum," Luminara stated. Her voice was calibrated to a soothing auditory frequency. "Other civilizations avoid Ember Ridge for a reason. You should not be here." The human coughed. It was a wet, inefficient sound. He stared up at her towering form, tracking the movement of her silver hair as it floated in the ambient anti-gravity field of the chamber. "Marcus," he whispered. Luminara cataloged the auditory data. "Your designation." "Noted." "My crew," Marcus rasped, his voice a harsh friction against the humming stone. "I did the pods, You are the sole biological entity remaining in this sector," Luminara replied objectively. He closed his eyes. A clear saline fluid leaked from his tear ducts. Luminara recorded this anomalous moisture leak, attempting to categorize its biological function. Why did a being of such structural fragility leak vital fluids when experiencing data regarding the absence of its unit? Before she could inquire about the fluid, the atmospheric pressure inside the chamber dropped precipitously. The golden light flickered. A deep tectonic vibration echoed through the volcanic rock beneath their feet. The mountain was shaking. Luminara's internal resonance shifted to a sharp defensive harmonic. She looked toward the zenith portal. The sky above Athera 6 was darkening, rapidly eclipsed by the descent of Dark Blade warships. And while the hegemony fleet was renowned across the galaxy for executing planetary subjugations with mathematically perfect precision, this particular deployment suggested an unprecedented level of urgency regarding the dormant technology housed within these walls. They had arrived. The cavernous ceiling fractured. Luminara shielded the fragile human. The builders left this machine dormant because the necessary psychological architecture requires a localized gravity distortion shattered her calculation. Commander Drethok descended through the ruined Zenith portal, flanked by 40 heavily armored hegemony shock troops. Drethok ignored the dying biped bleeding on the floor. The warlord strode directly toward the core prism, a massive floating sphere of contained golden energy suspended above the central diagnostic plinth. Hegemony doctrine dictated that absolute power responded only to absolute authority. Drethok raised his heavy kinetic gauntlet, commanding the ancient machine to yield its hidden arsenal. The sphere remained completely dark. It did not recognize logic. It did not calculate conquest. Luminara watched Drethok's rising fury as he struck the console. The hegemony had eliminated chaos from their genetic sequences millennia ago, rendering them incapable of interfacing with a technology built entirely on the unpredictable, messy vibrations of raw creativity. Marcus slid off the plinth. He could barely stand. He stumbled blindly toward the dark sphere. Luminara felt a sudden surge of terrifying protectiveness. Her internal harmonics shrieking a biological warning as the broken human placed his bare, freezing hand against the silent ancient metal. "Please," Marcus whispered. The sanctum detonated with light. It was a blinding, impossible radiance, thousands of weapon designs, geometric shields, and ancient autonomous drones materialized from pure human thought, pouring out of the chamber and into the frozen sky. The radiant swarm moved with absolute chaos. They did not fly in recognized military formation. They did not attack with calculated optimal trajectories. They swarmed like angry insects, a living star field born from the desperate, beautiful, and utterly terrifying imagination of a single dying mind. Drethok ordered his shock troops to fire. The swarm simply fractured, flowing around the searing plasma bolts like liquid water before consuming the hegemony ROP ships piece by piece. Marcus stood at the central console. His eyes tracked golden data streams no one else could see. He orchestrated the orbital slaughter with the frantic improvisation of a cornered predator. As he redirected a massive cluster of drones to sever the hegemony flagship's primary thrusters, Luminara watched his thumb absently wipe a smear of dried volcanic ash off the pristine, molecularly perfect control console. He was dismantling a galactic empire. He was cleaning dust. The hegemony fleet, built on rigid and flawless algorithms, could not process the localized chaos. They could not predict an enemy who was inventing absurd tactics in real time, pulling strategies from half-remembered childhood games and desperate survival instincts. For the first time in 500 standard cycles, the Commander Drethok transmitted a fleet-wide broadcast that shattered the foundation of his perfect empire. He ordered a full retreat. As the atmospheric sonic booms of the fleeing warships echoed across the volcanic glass, Luminara finally understood that the core prism's ancient creators had recognized a fundamental, terrifying cosmic truth that the rest of the highly advanced galaxy had systematically and foolishly bred out of their own genetic sequences over thousands of generations of sterile evolution. Imagination was the ultimate weapon. Ember Ridge fell silent. The ancient machines deep within the mountain continued to hum, broadcasting an impossible signal across the dark expanse of the galaxy. Humanity had arrived. Luminara turned her glowing gaze back to the fragile architect of this new era as he sat slumped against the golden plinth. She opened a new, secure data log in her internal archive, titling it with the human word he had whispered, and began recording the impossible history of the creature behind the cracked visor.